The village of Ravenswood was a place where the wind carried whispers and the trees seemed to bow with secrets too heavy to bear. Tucked away at the edge of the forest, it was a place forgotten by time, where superstitions were woven into the fabric of everyday life. So, when the black cat appeared, no one thought much of it at first. It was late autumn when Mrs. Hargrove, the widow who lived in the crumbling cottage near the old mill, first noticed it. She was out collecting kindling for the hearth when she spotted a dark shape darting between the trees. Its coat was so black that it seemed to absorb the twilight, and its eyes, a luminous yellow, gleamed like two cold lanterns in the fading light. The cat watched her, motionless, its gaze fixed on her as if it had been waiting. Mrs. Hargrove shivered and hurried back inside, but the memory of the creature's stare lingered with her. By morning it was nothing more than a passing thought, a trick of the dusk, she told herself, but the feeling of unease clung to her, like the dampness in the air. The next evening the black cat was seen again, this time by the widow Fletcher as she returned from the market. She found the creature sitting in the middle of the narrow cobblestone road, its tail curled delicately around its paws, as if it had claimed the village as its own. It did not move when she approached, nor did it flinch when her horse pulled the cart dangerously close. She could have sworn the beast smiled at her. Within days, more sightings were reported. The black cat, silent as a shadow, ever watchful, began to appear at odd moments, perched atop the church steeple during Sunday Mass, slinking through the graveyard as the sun set, and even crouching beneath the ancient oak tree at the village center, where it stared with those haunting yellow eyes. No one knew where it had come from, and though cats were not uncommon in Ravenswood, there was something about this one that unsettled the villagers. The more it appeared, the more misfortune seemed to follow in its wake. It started with small, unexplainable accidents. A child tripped and broke her arm after running past the cat. The butcher's son fell gravely ill, though no doctor could explain his sickness. The town bell, which had hung for centuries in the church tower, suddenly came crashing down in the dead of night, missing the innkeeper's daughter by mere inches. Each time the black cat was spotted nearby, watching, waiting, its eerie yellow eyes glowing in the darkness. The whispers began soon after. "There's something wrong with that cat," old Mr. Walcott muttered to anyone who would listen. "It ain't natural, I tell you. No normal beast behaves like that." The villagers began to grow uneasy, but no one was willing to speak too loudly of their fears. Ravenswood was a superstitious place, and its people had long learned to leave the unknown undisturbed. They believed in curses, in spirits that wandered the woods at night, in things best left alone, and yet, despite their dread, no one made a move to rid the village of the creature. Perhaps it was fear that stayed their hand, or perhaps it was something darker, an unspoken knowledge that this cat was more than just flesh and bone. Then, one cold November evening, tragedy struck. Jonas Fields, a young farmer, was found dead in the woods, his body sprawled beneath the gnarled branches of a twisted yew tree. His face was frozen in a grotesque mask of terror, his eyes wide and unseeing. The black cat was there, sitting on a nearby rock, watching with silent interest as the villagers gathered around Jonas's lifeless form. No one spoke, but the same thought flickered in every mind. The curse had begun. The death of Jonas Fields sent a ripple of terror through Ravenswood. His sudden, inexplicable demise left the villagers shaken, and though no one dared say it aloud, all eyes turned toward the black cat. The beast, it seemed, had come to claim its first victim. In the days that followed, the cat vanished from sight, as if retreating into the shadows from whence it came. Yet, its absence did little to ease the growing dread in the hearts of the townsfolk. Superstition, which had long simmered beneath the surface of everyday life, now boiled over into fear. Whispers filled the corners of the tavern, at the market stalls, and in the church pews, where prayers were now laced with silent pleas for protection. It was old Mr. Walcott who first spoke what many had already begun to suspect. He stood outside the general store one afternoon, a gnarled cane in hand, his sunken eyes scanning the uneasy faces around him. "It's a curse," he muttered darkly, shaking his head. "That cat ain't natural. Mark my words, there's a darkness to it." Most of the villagers dismissed his talk as the ramblings of an old man. But when Mrs. Hargrove, who had first seen the cat, took ill just days after Jonas's death, people began to listen. Her fever was sudden and fierce, the local healer unable to explain its cause. As she lay in her bed, delirious with pain, she mumbled of yellow eyes watching her from the foot of her bed, waiting for her to draw her last breath. That same week, the village historian, Mr. Edmonds, received an unexpected visitor. It was young Eliza Fletcher, daughter of the widow who had seen the cat on the road. Eliza had always been curious by nature, her head filled with the stories her mother told her of Ravenswood's strange history. But lately, her curiosity had turned to fear. "There's something you should see," she whispered, her face pale as she handed Mr. Edmonds an old, tattered book. "I found this in the attic. It belonged to my great-grandmother." The historian's brow furrowed as he opened the brittle pages. Inside were yellowed letters, faded drawings, and entries written in a tight, frantic script. As he began to read, his blood ran cold. The book told the story of a woman named Catherine Ashford, who had lived in Ravenswood over a century ago. She had been an outsider, arriving in the village under a cloud of mystery, and the whispers about her soon turned dark. Accusations of witchcraft followed her wherever she went, fueled by strange occurrences that seemed to plague those who crossed her path. One passage stood out. Catherine Ashford was wronged. The villagers turned on her, and in their hatred, they took her child, accusing him of being born of the devil. She swore vengeance on them all, cursing the land and binding her spirit to a creature of darkness, one that would haunt Ravenswood for generations to come. A black cat, she said, would carry her curse, bringing ruin to all who laid eyes upon it. Mr. Edmonds's hands trembled as he closed the book. Could it be possible? Could Catherine Ashford's curse still linger after all these years? His rational mind rejected the notion, but the events unfolding in Ravenswood were becoming harder to explain. The historian, now consumed by a gnawing sense of dread, decided to take the matter to Father Malcolm, the village priest. Father Malcolm had always been a man of quiet faith, his sermons focused on light and hope. But when Mr. Edmonds presented him with the journal, even the priest could not mask his concern. "We must proceed with caution," Father Malcolm said gravely, his eyes scanning the text. "If there is truth to this curse, we must seek the source and find a way to break it before more lives are lost." The two men began their search for answers, but as they dug deeper into the village's past, they could not escape the feeling that they were being watched. On more than one occasion, both swore they caught a glimpse of the black cat, its yellow eyes glinting from the shadows, observing them with an unnatural intelligence. As night fell over Ravenswood, the cat returned, slipping through the darkened streets, its presence now undeniable. The curse had been unveiled, but its full horror was yet to be revealed. The full moon rose over Ravenswood, casting its pale glow on the cobblestone streets, where even the bravest of villagers hurried indoors, locking doors and drawing curtains. There was an unnatural stillness in the air, a heaviness that weighed on the town like a suffocating fog. Though no one said it aloud, everyone knew the black cat would return tonight. In the days since the curse had been revealed, fear had spread like wildfire. Children were no longer allowed to play outside after dusk, and the streets, once lively with chatter and activity, were now ghostly quiet by nightfall. Yet, despite their efforts to shut out the terror, the villagers could feel the cat's presence creeping closer with each passing day. Mr. Edmonds had grown particularly anxious. He had spent countless hours poring over old records, desperately searching for some clue to break the curse that now gripped Ravenswood. But the more he uncovered, the more helpless he felt. The curse was not just some relic of the past. It was alive, breathing, feeding off the fear that had taken root in the village. On the night of the full moon, a thick fog rolled in from the woods, shrouding the village in an eerie, otherworldly glow. The moon hung low in the sky, its silver light seeping through the mist like cold fingers. Inside their homes, the villagers sat in silence, listening to the wind as it whispered through the trees, praying they wouldn't hear the soft padding of paws outside their doors. It was nearly midnight when the first sign appeared. Mrs. Whitlock, the baker's wife, was the first to notice. As she prepared her kitchen for the next morning's bread, she glanced out the window and froze. There, sitting at the edge of her garden, was the black cat. Its luminous yellow eyes locked onto hers, unblinking. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, but its gaze sent an icy chill down her spine. She stumbled back, knocking over a bowl, and when she looked again, the cat was gone. Across the village, others saw it too. Some claimed it appeared in the graveyard, perched atop the weathered headstones. Others swore it had slipped through the village square, its dark silhouette almost blending with the fog. But no matter where it was spotted, the same dread followed, as if the cat's presence alone was enough to bring misfortune. And then came the screams. They echoed through the night, starting from the far side of the village and spreading like wildfire. Windows flew open, and terrified faces peered out into the moonlit streets. The screams came from the Harrington house, a small, dilapidated home near the edge of the forest. By the time the villagers gathered outside, it was too late. Inside, the scene was one of chaos. Martha Harrington, a quiet seamstress who lived alone, was found lying on the floor, her eyes wide with terror, much like Jonas Fields had been. Her face was twisted into a grotesque expression of fear, her mouth frozen in a silent scream. No marks or wounds marred her body, but the terror in her lifeless eyes spoke volumes. At the foot of her bed, in the shadowy corner of the room, sat the black cat, watching. Father Malcolm, who had arrived with the crowd, pushed his way through, crossing himself as he entered the room. His eyes fell on the cat, and for a moment it seemed as though the creature met his gaze with a knowing, almost mocking stare. He felt the weight of the curse settle over him, heavier than ever. "This is no ordinary cat," Father Malcolm whispered, his voice trembling. "It is bound to the darkness of this village, and it will not stop until it has claimed us all." Panic surged through the crowd, but before anyone could react, the cat rose to its feet, slipping past them all like a shadow. No one dared follow it as it vanished into the fog-drenched night. The next morning, the village was shrouded in fear. Martha's death was the final proof that the black cat's curse was real, and it was growing more powerful. The cat no longer needed to hide in the shadows. It had claimed its place in Ravenswood, and now, as the full moon began to wane, The villagers understood one terrible truth. The black cat would not stop until it had claimed every soul in Ravenswood. The village of Ravenswood had always been a place of quiet whispers and unspoken truths, but now silence reigned supreme. Fear hung thick in the air, and even the bravest of the villagers avoided speaking of the black cat, though its presence weighed on their every thought. As the days grew shorter and the nights darker, the people of Ravenswood began to lose hope. Amid the growing panic, Mr. Edmonds and Father Malcolm continued their desperate search for answers. They knew the curse was ancient, but they needed to know how to break it. The night of the full moon had shown that the cat's power was stronger than ever, and it would not be long before it struck again. It was in the ruins of Ravenswood Manor, the crumbling remains of what had once been the grandest estate in the village, that they found their next clue. Hidden among the debris of rotted floorboards and collapsed walls was an old wooden chest, sealed with a rusted iron lock. Inside were brittle parchments, bound together with a faded ribbon, and a letter addressed to the descendants of Ravenswood. Father Malcolm carefully unfolded the letter, his hands trembling slightly as he read the words aloud. To those who read this in desperation, know that you are not the first to face the darkness that now grips this village. The curse you suffer was born of a pact made in grief and rage, a pact that binds the spirit of Catherine Ashford to the Black Cat, her eternal messenger of vengeance. She was wronged by those who took her child, and in her fury she cursed this land, ensuring that her spirit would haunt Ravenswood for generations. The only way to break the curse is to undo the pact, but know this, the price is steep, for it requires a sacrifice, not of blood, but of soul. Father Malcolm lowered the letter, his face pale. A soul? What could that mean? Mr. Edmonds was silent, deep in thought as he scanned the rest of the papers. There were fragments of old writings, diary entries from villagers long dead, and crude drawings of the black cat, always with those piercing yellow eyes. But one document stood out, a page torn from a book, its ink faded but legible. It detailed a ritual, one that could sever the bond between the cursed cat and the spirit it carried, but the ritual's description was vague. What was clear, however, was that the ritual could only be performed by someone willing to offer their soul in exchange for the village's salvation. "It's a binding ritual," Mr. Edmonds said slowly. "Whoever performs it must willingly take on the curse, but instead of the cat, the curse will pass to them. They'll become its vessel." Father Malcolm frowned, his heart heavy with dread. Who would do such a thing? Who would sacrifice their very soul to end this horror? Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door of the manor. Startled, they turned to see Eliza Fletcher standing in the doorway. Her eyes were wide, and she held a small old journal in her hands. "I've been reading my great-grandmother's journal," she said quietly, stepping forward. "There's more to the story than we knew. Catherine Ashford wasn't just a witch. She was a mother and a healer. She came to Ravenswood to escape a life of suffering, but the village turned on her after her child died of illness. The boy wasn't cursed. He was sick. The villagers blamed her, and in their anger they took everything from her." Eliza paused, her voice trembling with the weight of the truth. In her grief, she made a pact with something dark, something that promised her revenge against those who wronged her. But I don't think she meant for the curse to last this long. I think she's trapped too. Father Malcolm and Mr. Edmonds exchanged a glance, the weight of the realization settling on them like a heavy stone. "So," Mr. Edmonds whispered, "this isn't just about breaking the curse. It's about freeing Catherine Ashford's spirit as well." Eliza nodded. "But to do that, someone has to take her place. Someone has to be willing to bear the burden of the curse, to carry it so that she can be released." The room fell into a deep, uneasy silence. The black cat, it seemed, was not merely a creature of vengeance, but the instrument of a deal gone horribly wrong. And now, the villagers faced a terrible choice: find someone willing to take on the curse, or continue to live in the shadow of death. Outside, the night grew colder, and in the distance, the mournful cry of the black cat echoed through the misty woods. The price of breaking the curse had been revealed, but who would be willing to pay it? The village was sinking deeper into despair. After the truth of the curse and the price to break it had been revealed, a suffocating fear gripped Ravenswood like never before. People spoke only in hushed voices, and the streets lay empty, haunted by the knowledge that the black cat's presence was no longer just an omen of misfortune. It was a harbinger of death. Inside the church, a small gathering had formed. Father Malcolm stood at the pulpit, his expression grave as he looked out over the faces of those brave enough to attend. Mr. Edmund sat nearby, his eyes shadowed with sleepless nights spent searching for any other way to break the curse. But there was none. "The time has come," Father Malcolm began, his voice solemn. "We can no longer hide from this evil. The curse must be broken before it claims more lives. We know the ritual, we know the cost, but who will step forward?" The silence in the room was deafening. No one moved. The weight of the decision was unbearable, and the idea of sacrificing one's soul to carry the curse was too horrific to comprehend. Everyone in the room had a family, had hopes, had dreams. No one wanted to meet the same fate as Catherine Ashford. Eliza Fletcher stood at the back, watching as Father Malcolm's question hung in the air, unanswered. Her mind raced. She had read her great-grandmother's journal over and over again in the days since the night of the full moon. Each time she turned the brittle pages, the story of Catherine's suffering became clearer, and a strange sense of understanding took root inside her. Finally, Eliza stepped forward. Her heart pounded in her chest and her throat felt tight, but she knew what had to be done. She had always felt a connection to the village's history, to its secrets, and now she realized, to its curse. "I will do it," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. All eyes turned toward her in shock. Father Malcolm's face paled. "Eliza, no, you don't understand what this means. You'll be bound to the curse forever. It will destroy you." "I do understand," she replied firmly. "I've read everything. Catherine Ashford's pain was never resolved. She's trapped in this curse just as much as we are. If someone doesn't step forward, more people will die, innocent people, and the curse will never end." Mr. Edmund stood shaking his head. "You're so young, Eliza. You have a future ahead of you. This isn't your burden to bear." "But it is," Eliza insisted. "The curse began with Catherine Ashford, and my family played a part in it. My great-grandmother knew the truth, and she did nothing to stop it. I won't make the same mistake. If I can save this village, then I have to try." Father Malcolm closed his eyes and whispered a prayer under his breath. He had known from the beginning that someone would have to step forward, but he had hoped it wouldn't come to this. Yet, as he looked at Eliza, he saw the determination in her eyes. She was ready to face what lay ahead. "The ritual," Mr. Edmund said, his voice faltering. "It must be done tonight, during the waning of the full moon, when the curse is at its weakest. Once it's performed, there's no turning back." Eliza nodded, her decision final. "Tell me what to do," Later that evening, they gathered in the old cemetery where the cursed black cat had first been seen. The full moon still hung in the sky, now low and faint, its light dimming as the fog rolled through the gravestones. Eliza stood in the center, surrounded by Father Malcolm, Mr. Edmonds, and a handful of others who had come to witness the ritual. In her hands, she held the book of the ritual, the torn page from the manor. The words were in a language long forgotten by most, but the intent was clear. She was to offer her soul willingly, binding herself to the curse so that Catherine Ashford's spirit could finally be set free. The black cat appeared, as if summoned by the words whispered into the cold night air. Its yellow eyes gleamed in the darkness, watching Eliza with that same eerie intelligence. For a moment, it seemed to pause, as if recognizing the sacrifice that was about to be made. Eliza closed her eyes and began to speak the incantation. The air grew colder, and the fog thickened, swirling around her like a living thing. She could feel the weight of the curse pressing down on her. But she continued, her voice steady as she spoke the final words. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and the black cat hissed, its eyes flaring with a strange, otherworldly light. And then, as the last word left her lips, the world fell silent. The ritual was complete. Eliza opened her eyes, her body trembling with the force of what had just occurred. The black cat sat before her, its gaze softer now, almost grateful. With a flick of its tail, it turned and disappeared into the fog, leaving only the echo of its presence behind. But Eliza knew that the curse had not been destroyed. It had simply changed hands. She was now the Black Cat of Ravenswood. The morning after the ritual was as still as a painting. The fog had lifted, and a strange calm settled over Ravenswood, as if the village itself were holding its breath. The sun rose sluggishly behind gray clouds, casting a pale light on the cobblestone streets, where life had seemingly returned to normal. But the villagers knew better. They had all heard the whispers, seen the strange happenings. They knew that Eliza Fletcher had taken the curse upon herself the previous night, binding her soul to the black cat. Though the village had been spared another tragedy, there was no celebration. There were no cheers of relief, no sense of victory. Instead, a quiet mourning lingered in the air, mourning not for a death, but for a life changed forever. Father Malcolm, his heart heavy, returned to the church, where he prayed for Eliza's soul. He had witnessed the ritual, had watched the black cat vanish into the fog, but there was no peace in what they had done. He knew the curse still lurked in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Mr. Edmonds could not shake the guilt that gnawed at him. He had spent years studying the village's dark history, unearthing secrets best left buried. And now he had helped orchestrate the ritual that had condemned a young woman to a cursed existence. As he passed through the village, his footsteps echoed in the quiet, and he wondered if the price they had paid was truly worth it. Eliza had not been seen since that night. Several days passed before she finally reappeared. She stood at the edge of the village, beneath the same ancient oak tree where the black cat had once watched with its glowing yellow eyes. Her expression was distant, her posture rigid, as though she were listening to something far away. The villagers gathered hesitantly, their curiosity and fear drawing them toward her. She looked different now. Her skin seemed paler, her eyes colder, almost reflective of the cat she had become. But the most unsettling change was the way she moved, slow, deliberate, like a creature that no longer belonged to the human world. Father Malcolm approached her first, his voice soft and full of concern. "Eliza," he said, "how do you feel?" Eliza turned her head toward him, her gaze lingering for a moment before she spoke. "I feel the weight of it. The curse is still with me, but it's quiet for now." Her voice was low, almost detached, as if part of her had drifted away with the ritual. "What will happen to you now?" Mr. Edmonds asked, stepping forward. His eyes flickered with guilt. Eliza's lips curved into a faint, melancholic smile. "I am the Black Cat now. I carry the curse. As long as I stay away, the village will be safe." A murmur spread through the crowd. She was leaving. Ravenswood would be rid of the Black Cat, but at the cost of Eliza's exile. The weight of that sacrifice settled heavily on everyone present. They had been saved, but the one who had saved them could never return. "But where will you go?" a voice called from the crowd. Eliza looked up at the sky where the clouds hung thick and low, as if waiting to swallow her whole. "I don't know. Wherever the curse takes me, I suppose. It's part of me now, and it's not just here. It's everywhere, tied to the land in ways I don't fully understand yet." Father Malcolm stepped forward, his eyes filled with sorrow. "Eliza, you don't have to do this. There must be another way. Something we missed." But Eliza shook her head gently. "No, Father, this is how it must be. The curse can't be destroyed, only carried. Catherine Ashford's spirit is free now, but I am the new vessel. As long as I stay away, Ravenswood will be spared." With that, she turned and began to walk, her figure disappearing down the dirt road that led toward the woods. The villagers stood in silence watching her go, understanding that this was the last they would ever see of her. As she passed the boundary of the village, a dark shape slinked out of the shadows beside her. The Black Cat, or at least the manifestation of what she had become. It followed her, weaving in and out of the trees, its yellow eyes glowing faintly in the distance. And so, Ravenswood was left in uneasy peace. The curse had been lifted, but not banished. Somewhere, in the dark corners of the land, it still prowled, waiting for the day when it might return. The village went back to its quiet life, but the people never forgot. Every so often, on moonless nights, they would swear they saw a shadow moving at the edge of the forest, a pair of glowing yellow eyes watching them from afar. Eliza Fletcher was gone, but her presence, like the curse, remained. The curse had passed, but its final toll was one that would linger in the hearts of those left behind.